I think the earliest I ever formed a plan, I envisioned myself being a high-ranking officer in the military, following in my stepbrother's footsteps and kind of being a leader, someone everybody looked up to, was proud of. That was the first aspiration I think I ever really had that stuck with me. I mean, it still is kind of in vogue to be a veteran, and I wanted to do something that made people proud, something that made some kind of a difference that was really neat. I was researching constantly, reading books by people that have been there, done that, learning, the tricks of the trade, how to be successful, reading testimonials about what it's like to be, like a soldier, how to make a career out of it, how to be a leader. So I was preparing a lot mentally, intellectually, but trained a bit physically to get ready for it, but that was about it.
When did you realize that you weren't happy? What got you to that point?
Well, I mean, I really wasn't happy, adolescent into adulthood. That whole period I wasn't happy, to be honest. But I kind of just assumed when I was young, well, it's just because I'm not an adult yet. When I can change my life and do all these great things, then I'll be happy. I'll make money, I'll have a rewarding career to pursue. But that didn't really work. So I've battled a lot of mental health issues for most of my life, and really until recently. So just significant depression, anxiety. The worst one was, I was probably about 19, got out of a serious relationship in a really rough way, kind of was estranged from my family for a while. So I really just discovered I had no support system, and despite wanting to be an adult, when kind of everything's on you and you have all the responsibility and no one to help, it's not fun. I drank myself to sleep for 6 months, and I took a lot of pills to forget where I was at. I'd like to say I met the Lord then, but it was a little while after.
Why did you think that alcohol would do it?
I could kind of talk about influences, I guess. It's a very common thing where I grew up. Drinking's just kind of what you do. Grew up in a really small town, so there's not much to do besides go to someone's house and drink. So it was kind of an easy thing to lean on. I was staying with a family friend at the time, so he was an alcoholic. So it was very easy to say, well, that's something for now.
The pills, were they designed to help the mental health, or were they designed to sedate, or what?
Sedation. Yeah, I couldn't sleep without being heavily drugged, so that was pretty much why I took them.
Did you ever try to take too many?
I did once. That was by far the scariest thing I've ever done. It was about 100 degrees outside and I was freezing. And I had cold sweats, and I think I fell asleep for 16, 17 hours. Didn't know if I was going to wake up. So that was pretty terrifying. Didn't do that again, because that was probably the lowest point of my life when I was about 19. So I had been introduced to the concept of God, and I was raised in a church of one kind, but I didn't really know what it had to do with me. I was never taught a relationship with God or led to actually dive into the Word and allow God to change me. I didn't know anything about the Holy Spirit or His role in my life, so I knew God was a thing. I believed that the God of the Bible was probably real, but I didn't know that was supposed to affect my life much.
Why do you think it didn't matter to you?
I mean, I sought comfort in the world and relationships, so not to put the blame on everybody else, but I had only known up to that point, I think, one serious Christian who knew the Lord, up to that point in my life. I had no idea what Christianity was or really who God was. I just knew He was a concept, a thing that was probably true. It made a lot of sense, but I didn't know why that would affect me.
When did God finally first speak to you?
I think I was 20 at the time. I was staying with my uncle, actually, and he was out of town a lot because he worked in the oil field, so I was basically getting to stay with him for cheap and house sitting while I kind of figured my life out after all the drinking and stuff. I knew I was supposed to go somewhere, but I didn't know where, and I remembered my great-grandma before she passed, left me with a Bible. And then I started thinking about, growing up and, well, there has to be something that I'm here for. So I was like, well, I'm just going to open it. And so I started reading, had no idea what I was reading really, besides some Bible stories. I knew nothing of Scripture. And I just remember feeling like calm for the first time. Like I've always struggled with anxiety, so like being calm it was kind of eerie, but I felt really comforted, like I wasn't alone anymore. So I just began seeking at that point and learning what it meant to seek. So he began speaking to me while I was there and just assuring me that I haven't been alone, that I need to stop running.
How did you know it was God?
I mean, after all the drugs and drinking, it's like I hadn't known peace for a long time. So actually having peace, I was like, well, it has to be something supernatural. It can't be anything man-made. And, the God of the Bible does miracles, so maybe it's him. It's got to be. I don't have any other answer. There have been dramatic moments where the Lord spoke to me, but initially it was definitely more of a process. I wish I could tell you more about where I was in the Word, because I was very confused about what the Word was. Like, I knew it's a book. I've known some historical stuff, but I remember jumping into the Gospels and reading Psalms a lot. And then I kind of stumbled onto Paul's letters and just realized there's a lot more to the Bible than I thought there was. And started feeling pretty convicted about all the different things he wrote to the churches. And I was like, ooh, this was written for me too.
And so what did you do in response to that?
I started to learn that reading was important and actually continuously seeking, not just, putting God on a shelf for when I need him. So very gradually I did begin to seek more. I quit smoking cigarettes and I almost entirely quit drinking. I did still drink some, but never to sedate myself and force myself to sleep. Did indulge a bit too much still, but that was a bit of a longer process. I guess I started understanding that I wasn't alone was probably the biggest change that took place mentally and spiritually, because I did really feel like God was my father. It didn't feel weird to say God the Father anymore. I moved shortly after that point where I started seeking. Actually, I went to college in Abilene and was even more alone physically, but mentally and spiritually, I had never felt better.
So what does it mean to feel alone?
It feels like there's no love in the world. Like love is a fairy tale concept in a Disney movie that doesn't exist. And you have no reason to believe it exists. It's just something fun in stories you read. There's very little joy for being alive, is what aloneness feels like.
What was your relationship with your earthly father at that time?
Oh, let's see. So at that time, about the time I was 20, we really didn't talk much. I remember I have really fond memories of my dad when I was 6 and 7. And I struggle to remember all of it because I was so young, but it definitely changed. He was definitely the aggressive type. We did not click emotionally. We didn't really share the same interests. And he was there physically, he never left or anything, but he did feel very absent, leading up till I moved out after high school. And so we really didn't have much of any relationship. I mean, there was definitely some resentment, but it wasn't like we outwardly lashed out at each other. We just weren't close at all.
So how did God start to become your father?
I guess the first thing that pops into my mind is kind of surprising. You know that parents discipline you, right? So towards the end of my time in high school, my dad and my stepmom split up. And so leading up to that, probably for a year and a half, there was very little consistency or discipline. It's I honestly had too much free reign. I got away with too much for a time. And so then becoming an adult and getting to that point where I was I'm being disciplined and loved like a father is supposed to. I was it's just a really crazy feeling. And I was really resentful at first, but then Like I started to understand that everything he was doing was for my benefit and his glory. Like a lot of it came through correction, but gentle correction. It wasn't the heavy-handed type that like earthly fathers and mothers too, but especially like from my father, like the harshness. So I hadn't experienced loving correction as like all that much. So it kind of touched me in a way that like has never happened before.
How did God work with you when you first surrendered to Him?
So I first surrendered right before moving to Abilene. So I was still living with my uncle, still beginning to spend time in the Word. Delivering me from smoking was like a dramatic thing. I didn't have to think about it. I was just like, oh, I can quit tomorrow. Why can I quit tomorrow? That was really strange. So that was like the first change I noticed. Then very slowly, I started thinking less about career and then thinking more about what's actually important, because I was about to go to college to get a good job. So I was all about career and advancement and doing something great. And then that gradually shifted to where I was, thinking more about relationships and not just romantic ones, but like friendships, relationships with people that are older than me, people that are younger than me. Probably the biggest like heart change was actually like making me less selfish. I had a ton of personal time, and I was an obsessive gamer. I did all sorts of just stuff where I needed big chunks of time, and God slowly started showing me that like I'm made to serve. So showing me that there's joy in the work for others. That was a pretty big one that he started right away.
You just were able to, by God's grace, quit smoking?
Yeah, I had complete power over it, to be honest with you. There's other things I struggled with more, but that one was immediate.
Were there areas that you knew needed to change even before you were saved?
I knew smoking was bad for me, so that's an easy one. I knew that like video games are cool. God's given us a neat technology, but they can't consume you. They destroy your brain completely. So I knew that playing games literally till the sun came up and going right into work the next morning was not good for me. I knew that was something I lived for, and that had to change. And I knew that before finding God. So yeah, they were probably the big ones. When I was very young, there was 4 kids in the house, 2 parents busy at work. My dad and my stepmom did the best they could. I'm definitely not bashing them. But I was kind of the weirdo. I was a very quiet kid, did not receive a lot of the affection that I felt that I should. So I felt very unloved. And so I had to seek comfort in something. So as a young child, I can't just leave and go find stuff. So I'm confined to a house. Well, there's video games. That's something to do. It's flashy, it's fun, it's a cool story. And I liked reading, so I liked stories. I think I started playing handheld games like Nintendo stuff, and then gradually progressed to consoles. And when my parents would go to bed, I'd stay up and play video games once they went to sleep and I heard their room shut. So I got to the point where, especially when I wasn't in school, I could play all day. I literally didn't do anything else if I wasn't reading or something.
So how did God deal with you on that? Did he convict you?
Not immediately. There were other things in my life he definitely dealt with first. So that progressed definitely into college. And then shortly after it, I just stopped enjoying it. It was actually a really weird change. And I'm sure it was from God, because I spent almost 20 years at that point playing some kind of games and never being tired of it. Occasionally I would switch up a genre, but I was always having fun. And I went from playing sometimes 12 hours a day to more like 8 and 7 and 6. And then there were some days I actually wouldn't play. And it wasn't until I was probably just about to graduate college that I started realizing it was more of a problem. Even though it had lessened, I was like, oh, okay, that actually needs to go down more. Because at that point I was much more consistent in the Word, and it was more of a decision of, well, I have 2 hours before class and I haven't read today. So what am I going to fill my time with? And then it was more obvious that it was a clash, and I was like, well, what's more important to me?
Did you make reading the Bible a discipline?
Gradually. Definitely happened, but it took a while to become like truly consistent.
This is just how my testimony is like when I started setting out to read the Bible, I didn't know what I believed, but I committed to reading the Bible just to find out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did that, it was on the same level of I'm going to brush my teeth every day. I'm going to make my bed every day. I'm going to read the Bible every day. And I was like, even if I don't feel it,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do it. So do you feel like it was something that you made yourself do and then it morphed into something that you liked?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. And it really depended on where I was at in the Bible, because it was like a lot of the books, especially in the Old Testament, and you don't really know the purpose of the books, the story, the time period. You're like, God, why am I reading this? And then over time it becomes more clear, and now I can say I enjoy like reading all of the Bible. But there were certain things that definitely attracted me more in Scripture. So at points it was easier, my first time reading.
What issues took longer to work through?
Ooh, okay. Probably sexual immorality was the longest one.
Okay.
Because I had pursued romantic relationships as a source of comfort as an older teenager going into adulthood. That was kind of just what I fell on. And so, of course, with that comes being sexually immoral in one way or another. Near the end of my stay in college, like it was very clear that there was a choice. And God very clearly told me, we've gone this far, we can't go any farther till you deal with that. It's like either you choose that or you live the way you're supposed to live. So that was a difficult choice because that was what I always fell back to. But yeah, that one took a while longer. I probably struggled with the choice for a couple months, and they were very miserable months until I left. It makes a lot of sense now, like why the Bible doesn't stop talking about it, because like God is aware of how easily that sin can beset a lot of people. And so that's why it's in so many epistles and so many books. Keep yourself from the stuff because it's so difficult to get out of.
Let's talk about purity, okay?
Sure.
Because for me, I've discovered the joy in purity, like in the importance of that. What do you think people are missing that don't understand purity?
Well, as far as those that are like in sin and not concerned with the concept of purity, peace. I don't think they know what peace is. And I think the majority of people, I don't think they're even aware of it, but they're seeking comfort. Like, we live in a really broken world, and like I'm not the first person to seek relationships to fix it. So they're seeking distraction, they're going full-blown escapism, they're just choosing something besides video games. Especially with broken households, the more that happens, it's like impurity goes up quite a bit because they're just looking for love, but they don't know what love is because God's not priority. Or maybe they haven't met God, maybe they haven't even heard the gospel yet. Just depends. They're definitely missing out on what real peace is. I'd say that's the biggest thing.
What's the difference between the love that people are seeking in the wrong places and what God's love actually is?
Well, when people are seeking it, they're seeking it to satisfy something deep inside them. But God, to be frank, doesn't need us. He didn't have to send his son to do a thing. Like, we were all guilty. We were not holy or righteous. But because he's truly selfless, he gave everybody a chance. And he pursues everyone relentlessly, even though he has nothing to gain from that, really. Like, he could have populated heaven with a new creation and let the world just kind of go if he really wanted to. But out of his love, because he's truly selfless, like, he pursues all of us every day.
How has Jesus been patient with you?
Well, the sexual immorality thing kind of jumps to the forefront. Like, he didn't walk away when I refused to make the choice immediately. He had every right to. I didn't deserve any kind of time. But also, just struggling with the stress of college and working at the same time. The Lord sent people to me to wake me up and say, hey, remember, I'm trying to do a work in you. Let's go. So he didn't have to do that either. But he involved other people and took the time to make sure I didn't get led astray along the way.
How are we as Christians supposed to respond to somebody in your situation that was wanting the truth?
Well, that's a fun conversation in modern America especially, because we're told truth is relative, and it's not. I think it's Psalms that says the sum of thy word is truth. God is truth, and we're not. Like, we're naturally deceitful. If you want truth, you have to have God with it. There's no in between. So, I mean, it's kind of oversimplifying, but sharing the love of God with them, that's in whatever capacity is appropriate for that person or situation.
How do you stay consistent with God?
Praying. There's nothing wrong with like folding your hands, bowing your head, raising your hands, however you want to pray. But like praying without ceasing is written for a reason. So as you're going about, as you're driving to work, for me is a big one, because I have an hour drive in the morning. So as I'm waking up, I'm talking to God. Like, I'm thanking him for another day with my wife. I'm thanking him for the job. I'm asking for help, because I think that's probably the biggest one. It's not just gratitude, but realizing like I'm becoming stronger, but I'm becoming stronger because I'm more dependent on him, not because I'm actually stronger. So recognizing that and continuously asking for help, because I'm his child. I don't have this all figured out. Like, I still need my Father's help. So keeping that at the forefront, just wanting to seek him throughout the day, not just when I read, although staying in the Word is a huge part of it, and allowing him to speak into my life, confirm things, correct me, teach me, whatever he wants to do at the time. But I definitely think it starts with the prayer life for me.
How do you get your heart right for prayer?
There's a verse somewhere in the New Testament that talks about just thanksgiving and just remembering I need to be very grateful for everything. So just meditating on thankfulness. I try most times when I pray to start with thank yous and not, hey, I need this thing. So just really meditating on how grateful I should be. Because kind of like I said earlier, God doesn't need me. He didn't have to save me. He doesn't have to minister to me daily. He doesn't have to do anything. But out of his love, he still does. So I need to recognize that. Otherwise, eventually pride sets in.
How is God currently working on your life?
So right now, I think the biggest thing that he's working in me is patience. Patience for a lot of things. He's really led me to be pretty accomplished in my career in a short amount of time. So I'm getting more positions of leadership, which is cool, but it means a lot of patience is required. There's a lot of training, a lot of sharing knowledge and investing in other people. And things don't happen overnight that way. Not just in my work life, but also sharing my faith and conversations, speaking to my family about God. There's a lot of things I'm waiting on. There's a lot of things going around at church, a lot of people suffering that we're praying through, and I'm having to wait. I am seeing incredible results of God moving, but I have to wait, and I have to be okay with waiting. So patience is definitely the biggest one.
What does it mean to you that God meets us where we're at? Because that's my struggle with patience, is I want to be there already.
Right. It's pretty incredible. Like, I've had times in my life where people have met me where I'm at, and I'm just kind of a ball of anxiety or anger maybe, sadness, whatever the case, and like people have taken the time to love me and meet me where I'm at. And even though maybe I didn't really want to be there at the moment, maybe I wanted to be somewhere else or through a particular trauma or problem, but looking back on it, I recognize the importance of that moment. And the more I try to rush things, the more I completely screw everything up. So really just thinking about everything I've said, okay, God, do it. I'm not driving anymore. Everything's worked out better for me, for God's glory, for everything. So really just remembrance is the big one.
Let's talk about mental health.
Sure.
How does Jesus help you with anxiety and with depression?
Depression is definitely not as difficult of a battle anymore. Anxiety is still there though. So one big thing, talking about consistency, is like before I make a lot of work calls, I pray for the ability to speak. Before talking to you, I pray for help speaking because I don't like public speaking, or even just speaking to people in authority gives me crazy anxiety. Speaking in groups especially. So really just being dependent on the Lord for help in social situations, that always helps anxiety tremendously, especially when I'm leading a project at work.
How do you think God delivered you from depression?
Really by just showing me gradually that all of the things that I was seeking really were just detrimental to me. There were relationships, different forms of substance abuse, excessive gaming, and really just everything. So showing me what I'm here for and me gradually like accepting it with his help. It's like there's a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of stressful stuff going on around me, but I'm not depressed. Like I'm pretty happy actually. Because really I just know more of God's goodness now, and I really do trust in it.
So do you think it's maybe the joy of the Lord?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Let's talk about what the joy of the Lord is for you.
Really just goes back to peace. And it's simultaneous with gratitude and just hope for the future. Because, like I said, there's a lot going on right now, personally, in my church, in my workplace, pretty much chaos in every arena of my life, but I've never been more calm. And God doesn't bring healing in every single situation at that exact moment. He didn't for every issue I've had, but he's still good. And seeing the way he ministers to me and ministers to others, like just having that loving Father and knowing the Holy Spirit is always with me to empower me, I don't really spiral like I used to. Like there's some things that upset me that I need to take a minute, but like most of the time I feel pretty great just knowing that the Lord is with me.
What prayers or desires do you have that you haven't seen yet?
Okay. Oh, let's see. While work is important, I don't have a job I enjoy. So, never had a job I enjoy. Kind of getting to the point where I don't believe that's possible for me. It's just work. And as the work of the Lord becomes more important, secular work, it can be exciting, but I don't really enjoy it all that much. So, doing something for a living that is kind of fun, definitely not answered. There is a lot of cultural Christianity in my family, and I have witnessed to pretty much all of them, but there has not been any form of growth in faith of any of them, to the best of my knowledge. So definitely, I don't want to say an unanswered prayer, I just haven't seen the results I'm praying for. Of course, it's gradual, you have to plant seeds, but it is a difficult thing to watch. There's a lot of people in my personal life that are going through some pretty insane circumstances, a lot of family tragedies, a lot of physical problems, a lot of mental problems, and God has not magically delivered them, though he could, because he's God and he's incredible. But I don't doubt his goodness for a second, even though it is very frustrating, because I think, like especially for me, like I'm fine with taking someone else's suffering, but when you can do nothing about it, it's very difficult to deal with. to watch people you care about like suffer.
What's the good part about suffering?
Well, without any form of suffering, I think we're all prone to wander. I think pretty much everybody will eventually wander in some way, and we have to be dependent on God, and suffering is the easiest way to make that happen. I mean, suffering is what initially kickstarted the spread of the gospel in the New Testament. But it also shows the grace and mercy of God to people who don't know him yet. Whenever I'm suffering or a loved one is suffering, and people ask me where my hope comes from, why I'm happy, why I'm not more scared or worried or depressed based on circumstances. So, I mean, it really does bring glory to God in certain circumstances like that. But also, I mean, suffering in different forms, it's used to correct us. But also it's used to accomplish deeper works in us that maybe wouldn't have been possible, or maybe we were resisting beforehand. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's never enjoyable, and we shouldn't necessarily wish for it. But it's something the Lord uses in all his wisdom, and I don't fully understand it, but I know that his thoughts are way higher than mine, so I have to be okay with it.
Is there anything else that you feel like you want to say?
If you are running from literally anything in the world, whether it's people or pain or anything else, pick up a Bible. I guarantee Jesus is at your door and you just don't fully understand it yet. Maybe you're distracted. But there is a place you can run to, like in God, and you won't regret it.
What miracle would you share with the world? What is your biggest testimony?
All we're told, seek first like the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. And I put that to the test. So I sought God before everything else. And I did walk away from all the things that were destroying me. And I found like the love of God. Like my life has meaning now. I'm genuinely loved. I have a purpose for living. I have an incredible wife who's my best friend. I have like everything I've ever needed, and like even stuff that I just want. It's like I have actual happiness. Like, yes, the world is broken, but it doesn't break me anymore. I think that's about it.